Boxing's on fire right now. It's controlling all the narrative digitally across social media on a far different level to MMA and UFC right now. MMA, and you know, I know
Tell us.
it's a poor relative, but it's not their fault, really, what's happening. I'm sure people will feel like they could have done some things different.
Eddie Hearn has sparked a fresh wave of controversy after taking aim at UFC president Dana White, intensifying the ongoing tension between the two high-profile promoters. The outspoken Matchroom Boxing boss didn't hold back, further fueling the growing friction between the worlds of boxing and mixed martial arts. Following this verbal jab, Eddie Hearn criticized the lack of distinct branding across major UFC events. He pointed to the UFC's consistent visual presentation as a model of cohesive branding. Hearn emphasized his own approach, describing himself as a storyteller who ensures each event has its own unique narrative and identity.
Is your artwork, you know, that you create, or your visuals, looks the same as everybody else. You know, like Top Rank could do a poster, and you wouldn't know if it was Top Rank or Matchroom or Golden Boy. You know, I said, so what you're saying, that you want the artwork and the visuals to be the same for every event?
No.
You know, well, that's what UFC do.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, but for me, I'm a storyteller, right? So every show has a narrative.
Yes.
This is not Matchroom.
Building on that point, Eddie stressed the importance of tailoring event artwork to reflect the unique story behind each fight, suggesting that a personalized visual approach keeps the sport fresh and engaging. He noted that without this creative effort, the presentation can become monotonous, something he actively works to avoid in his promotion strategy.
Back at the Boardwalk Court, Atlantic City, making history in a unification welterweight matchup for the Ring Magazine Championship, where the former winners were Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Floyd Mayweather. Do you know what I mean? I need that artwork and the press conference and the promo to reflect the story that I'm telling. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. Do you know what I mean? Where it's different. Because sometimes it does get monotonous. Oh, it's another show. Oh, who's on this week? And then all of a sudden you've got like Ben Eubank and like this crazy video game advert, and then the father's here, and then next week you're shutting down Times Square. The product.
Expanding his argument further, Hearn pointed to the UFC as an example of a promotion that has taken its product, polished it, and refreshed its image when needed. He explained that revamping the look and feel of events can be crucial, especially during periods when star power is lacking. According to Hearn, a more dynamic presentation helps maintain excitement. He suggested that if marquee matchups like Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov or Tom Aspinall versus John Jones were happening, fans wouldn't be expressing fatigue with the current state of the sport.
You just give it a polish. Turd's probably not the right reflection for the UFC because it's a brilliant product, but you know, you got to revamp it a little bit. You got to remodel it, and sometimes you do that if the talent wasn't quite there. You need a different look and a fresher look. Like if they had, I don't know, Conor McGregor fighting. If Khabib was still around, I'm a bit of a casual. Forgive me, but you know, if Aspinall was fighting John Jones, you know, we wouldn't be sitting here saying it's just a bit tired, isn't it? It's really down to the actual product, which is the fights. And I just feel like they haven't.
Furthermore, Hearn pushed back against the notion that MMA holds equal footing with boxing, reiterating that it remains a poor relative in terms of global stature and legacy. He noted that while the UFC has carved out its place in combat sports, it has never truly reached the level of boxing in terms of impact.
You know, like, and it's never really been that way. UFC running the royal, and listen, I'll never criticise UFC. I think it's an unbelievable brand, but it's not their fault, really, what's happening. I'm sure people will feel like they could have done some things different. It's all cyclical, and obviously with Turki Al-Sheikh's investment, Saudi Arabia's investment in boxing, you're seeing bigger fights, bigger nights, but also more thinking outside the box. And that comes really with spending money. Of MMA. But right now, I just don't see the big fights, the narrative, the storylines playing out in the UFC like it has done in the past. It's not that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just that it's cyclical. And obviously with the investment of Saudi Arabia into boxing, we're seeing all the big fights happen. That's lifting the sport. It's lifting viewership. It's lifting subscriptions on DAZN. It's lifting ticket sales for all events. Boxing is hot right now, and that's fact.
This concern over waning star power, Hearn criticized the UFC for what he sees as a shortage of genuine superstars capable of capturing widespread public interest. He pointed out that several fighters in the promotion continue to headline despite repeated losses, suggesting that this pattern reflects a lack of new, compelling talent capable of carrying the brand forward.
6 UFC superstars. I couldn't do it. I could give you the ones that seem to keep losing quite a bit and then just come back. Do you know what I mean? But, but again, was that just a period with Khabib and Conor and like those kind of
As you
guys?
said last week, it is cyclical.
In response to this, Ariel Helwani weighed in on the discussion, expressing that what initially drew him to combat sports was the larger-than-life personalities. He explained that the emotional pull of the fight game doesn't always depend on title stakes, but rather on the aura and individuality of the fighters. Helwani noted that when events start to feel uniform and the brand begins to overshadow the athletes themselves, it signals a deeper issue within the sport's presentation.
Drew me to the fight game was Tyson wearing all black with the towel and the boots. And what drew me to UFC was Chuck Liddell had shorts with, icicles on it, and Tito Ortiz had fire. Like, I like the characters. I like pro wrestling. And so when it feels like that, when it feels larger than life, I'm drawn to it, even if it may not be undisputed title fight. But when it all feels the same and when the brand becomes bigger than the fighters and the fights, I feel like there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for me...
In alignment with Helwani's viewpoint, Hearn responded by drawing a contrast between boxing and the UFC, emphasizing that while promotions like Matchroom and Top Rank are recognized brands, the real brand in boxing is the fighters themselves. He stressed the importance of each fighter having their own unique identity that connects with fans. Hearn added that building a fighter's profile involves allowing them to be authentic, while it's the promoter's responsibility to elevate and shape that identity into a recognizable brand that resonates with the public.
Yes, Matchroom Boxing is a brand and Top Rank is a brand, but the brand is the fighters and they have their own individual brands.
Right.
And you want that to resonate with the fan base so that they understand that, and I always say to a fighter when we've got to build their profile, I don't want you to be, fake. Like, be yourself, and it's up to us as the promoter to build you as a brand, because that's how the fan base tunes in. Yeah, I know Conor Benn, he's the destroyer. Eubank's the guy that walks around with his dad. AJ's the clean-cut guy. Tyson Fury is just this character that's out. Like, they're the characters. And like you say, it's like WWE without the script.
Reinforcing his position, Eddie Hearn compared boxing to WWE in the sense that it's driven by characters and drama, just without the scripted outcomes. He criticized the UFC for consistently prioritizing its brand over individual fighters, arguing that this approach can limit the sport's ability to produce mainstream stars. Hearn pointed out that when a fighter like Conor McGregor emerges, the entire dynamic shifts, but he believes the UFC struggles to embrace the idea of a fighter becoming bigger than the platform itself.
I feel like UFC, the problem is with UFC is I always feel like they always want the brand to be bigger, their brand to be bigger than that of the fighter. And when a star like Conor McGregor comes around, everything changes. And I don't think they really like that. And I think Dana coming into boxing is going to be brilliant for boxing.
Taking this argument a step further, Eddie questioned the current direction of the UFC, drawing a sharp comparison to boxing's recent surge in visibility and momentum. He highlighted that boxing is experiencing significant growth in terms of viewership, public attention, narrative depth, and digital engagement. According to Hearn, the sport is thriving across multiple platforms, capturing conversation and interest in a way that suggests it's on a sharp upward trajectory, something he implied the UFC may be struggling to match.
I feel like boxing at the moment is just skyrocketing in terms of, eyeballs, attention, narrative, conversation, digital, narrative. And look, UFC is a massive business, but I just, do they need to make I'm saying this as a complete MMA casual. Do they need a John Jones against Aspinall style fight to really, not get back on track, because the business is incredible, but I don't know. It wasn't a leading question. It was just curiosity.
Moreover, Helwani agreed with Eddie Hearn's assessment, acknowledging that boxing currently offers more compelling moments. He noted that Hearn was comparing an entire sport to a single promotion, but pointed out that the UFC is often viewed as synonymous with MMA itself. Helwani remarked that the sport of MMA appears to be in a recession, describing its current state as a particularly challenging period marked by a lack of standout developments.
Some people off. There are more intriguing things happening in the sport of boxing. Now, we are comparing a sport to a promotion, but let's be honest, the promotion really is the sport. MMA right now is in a recession. MMA is in a really tough spot. There is no number two. Lord knows there's no number three, certainly not here in North America. And to your point, the UFC, they'll have their big shows once a month, a pay-per-view, typically top heavy. The last one was good. The next one is top heavy. Their Super Bowl show, their big one of the year, usually happens end of June, early July. That's International Fight Week. It's April 22nd right now. They have yet to announce a main event because they don't have a main event.
In response to Eddie, Michael Bisping pushed back on Eddie Hearn's remarks, dismissing them as expected commentary from someone with a vested interest in boxing. The former UFC champion suggested that Hearn's criticisms were naturally biased, given his role as a boxing promoter, and implied that his views should be taken in that context.
MMA, mixed martial arts, is pretty much the poor relative compared to boxing. That all the searches online by the kids are all for boxing. That all the superstars are for boxing. That you can't even name any superstars in the world of mixed martial arts. And that basically MMA is a bit old, it's a bit tired, and it's going nowhere. Listen, Eddie Hearn, as I said, he's a good guy. He's an incredible promoter. And he's a boxing promoter, okay? So of course he's gonna say these things.
However, Daniel Cormier and Ben Askren agreed that the UFC currently lacks star power, but noted that this issue isn't unique to MMA, adding that both UFC and boxing promotions face the same challenge in producing headline-worthy talent. He pointed to the Fatal Fury, stating that the only reason Eddie was there was to promote the event.
In terms of numbers, different. Stars, not so much. Guys with the ability to sell, not so much. But I think that's across all platforms. In the UFC, they're not selling pay-per-views at the rate that they were before.
Oh, so I agree with that, but don't you think that, and this is a little bit to Eddie Hearn's point, but I kind of think it's by design, is that no matter who is fighting, if there's a UFC thing on, they're going to have X amount of people tune in. And, ESPN cares about the amount of subscribers to their ESPN Plus platform. And I think UFC has been killing it for them.
Eddie Hearn was on that show this weekend because there's a lot of people fighting on Friday and Saturday. So
this coming Friday, Saturday?
That's the problem. You don't even know.
That's what I'm saying.
You don't even know, but there's big name fighters. Canelo's fighting.
Okay.
Teofimo Lopez is fighting.
Okay.
Ryan Garcia is fighting on those 2 days. And what is honestly like the matchups aren't great. Lou, throw the odds to those boxing fights. But they're putting on this blockbuster of an event, and people like you who's in combat sports don't even know it.
Cormier pointed out that Eddie Hearn's comments were filled with backhanded compliments, appearing respectful on the surface, but often followed by subtle jabs. He noted that Hearn would praise the UFC, only to immediately take a shot, creating a pattern of mixed messaging.
Guess what, bro?
What?
I think you have someone that is willing to speak about the UFC in the same way that you do, because you guys are like respectful, but then you kind of take your shots, then you give respect, then you take your shot. It's like you give compliments hidden underneath like a little bit of hate. That's like your game. That's
I don't
your
hate
game when it
UFC.
comes to Dana White. No, right there, Ben, where I go, he's very complimentary of Dana saying they run a great business, they do this, they do this. But then it's also like there's no stars there. But I think that in itself, Ben, if you do believe there aren't any stars there, that in itself lends to the idea that the UFC itself is what sells.
Correct.
And it's not the athlete. The only athlete that ever overcame that truly was Conor McGregor.
Agreeing with this assessment, Michael Bisping also took a jab at Ariel Helwani, criticizing him for not defending MMA during his exchange with Eddie Hearn. Bisping suggested that if Hearn had been speaking to someone more rooted in the MMA world, he would have been challenged more directly and educated on the realities of the sport.
Now, if he was talking to an MMA person, if he was, and if Eddie Hearn said, like, there's not even 6 stars in MMA right now, you would have thought that maybe the MMA guy would have said, hold on, let me educate you. Hold on, name me 6 UFC superstars. Whoever's conducting this interview right there, if they're an MMA guy, you would have thought that they would have interjected and said, hold on, you want 6 MMA superstars? We could name some off the top of my head. I don't know, John Jones, Tom Aspinall, Dricus du Plessis, Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Paddy Pimblett, Nate Diaz, Hamzat Chimaev.
5 minutes later.
Max Holloway. Who else? Francis Ngannou, by the way, who took on Tyson Fury in his first ever boxing fight, dropped him and almost beat him on the scorecards.
However, offering a rebuttal, Michael Bisping rejected the idea that boxing is dominating the narrative or significantly outpacing MMA in terms of online interest, particularly among younger audiences. He argued that while certain high-profile boxing events, like the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Ben bout, may temporarily spike search trends, it's largely due to their rare historic nature.
It's not controlling all the narrative, and it is not being searched way more by all the kids on social media and online. Of course, last weekend we had Chris Eubank Jr. taking on Nigel Benn. That was phenomenal. What an event that was. I said it's one of the best boxing fights I've ever seen, but that was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime situation. You had Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, who were rivals.
Doubling down on his defense of MMA, Bisping emphasized that these moments do not necessarily reflect a sustained shift in popularity, but rather short-term attention driven by unique circumstances.
Ever seen. And then the two kids about 30 years later get into boxing, hate each other, they square up, one of them cracks an egg around the other one's face. Chris Eubank Sr. brands his son a disgrace.
That's disgraceful.
Then he shows up at the arena with 65,000 people who absolutely lose their mind, and then the fight was phenomenal. So yeah, maybe right now the Google searches are in favor of boxing. That's because you just had that wild event, okay?
Continuing his defense, Bisping acknowledged the long-standing cultural significance of boxing, referring to MMA as the poor relative of the sport in terms of historical legacy. He highlighted boxing's deep roots, noting that it has been part of human culture for hundreds of years and predates the lifetimes of everyone alive today. According to Bisping, this long-established presence has made boxing universally recognizable, giving it an enduring edge in global awareness.
It's a poor relative. It's just a poor relative. It really is. Well, listen, if you think about the history of boxing, which has literally been around for hundreds of years, it is an Olympic sport. It used to be taught in schools. Boxing's ingrained in the culture of almost every human being. Everybody knows what boxing is because it was around before anyone on this planet even existed, before they even lived. There's been so many tremendous movies.
According to Bisping, this long-established presence has made boxing universally recognizable, giving it an enduring edge in global awareness. Acknowledging boxing's legacy, Bisping emphasized the cultural impact of boxing, pointing out the countless movies, documentaries, and television shows dedicated to the sport and its athletes over the years. He contrasted this with MMA, which he noted has only been around for about 3 decades, with the first UFC event taking place in 1993. Bisping argued that MMA is still relatively new compared to boxing, which benefits from a much longer history and deeper cultural integration.
There's been so many tremendous movies, films, TV shows, documentaries about incredible fighters like Mike Tyson, like Muhammad Ali. I mean, the list really goes on. MMA has only been around for 30 or so years. The first UFC event was in 1993.
Moreover, Michael Bisping expressed disbelief at Eddie Hearn's criticism of the UFC's production quality, stating that the difference between UFC and boxing events is like night and day. He argued that UFC events are far superior in terms of production, with a clear focus on the fights themselves rather than excessive theatrics. Bisping also pointed out the financial struggles within boxing promotions, noting that many events operate at a loss, one of the reasons he claimed why a significant portion of high-profile boxing shows are now being held in Saudi Arabia under the backing of Turki Al Sheikh.
I mean, come on, what are you talking about? The production levels at a UFC event compared to an average boxing event, it's day and night. And the focus is on the fights. Now, we know right now, a lot of the big boxing fights, they lose money. That's why Turki Al Sheikh has had to come in, and that's why most of the biggest fights are going down in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, last weekend that was in London, of course, because of the big British story, but of course Turki Al Sheikh was still there. Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk, they're all taking place in Saudi Arabia.
In addition, Michael Bisping drew a sharp contrast between the UFC and boxing by highlighting the UFC's truly global footprint. He pointed out that UFC events are held across a wide range of countries, including Azerbaijan, Australia, England, Canada, the United States, Brazil, and Mexico. Bisping emphasized that the UFC has evolved into a worldwide phenomenon with a consistent international presence that showcases its global appeal and reach.
Whereas the UFC is literally flying all over the world, including Saudi Arabia. They're in Azerbaijan, they're in Sydney, they're in England, they're in America, Canada, Brazil, Mexico. The list goes on.
However, Michael Bisping highlighted a key issue in MMA's global reach, pointing out that while the sport enjoys mainstream status in the United States, it struggles with visibility in the UK. He emphasized that for British fans, UFC events often air in the middle of the night, creating a barrier to consistent viewership and mainstream traction. In contrast, Bisping noted that in America, fights typically start in the early afternoon and enjoy prime coverage, solidifying MMA's place as a mainstream entertainment product.
Is that Eddie Hearn probably has the British perception of mixed martial arts and the UFC. What I mean by that is that out here in America, it's pretty much a mainstream sport, just like in Australia and in Brazil. The problem is in the UK, whilst there is tremendously passionate fans, tremendously passionate, some of the best fans in the world, I am so grateful for all those fans that supported me throughout my career, who stayed up live in Manchester to 6 o'clock in the morning to see me fight. We got some of the best fans in the world. However, the sport is on generally in the middle of the night. Out here in America, it starts at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2, 3, 4, depending on the time of the card.
In addition, Ariel Helwani pointed out that Dana White once claimed UFC events would never resemble boxing cards, which are often criticized for being top-heavy with just 1 or 2 major fights. However, Helwani argued that this is exactly what's happening now in the UFC. He stated that anyone denying this shift is simply not being truthful, as most current cards feature only 2 or 3 notable bouts, while the undercard and prelims often lack excitement and depth.
Next year, and there was once a time where Dana White would say our shows would never be like boxing events, top heavy, 1 or 2 big fights and nothing underneath. And anyone who tells you otherwise, that they are not doing that right now, is simply lying. They're very top heavy, and then the rest are relatively up and coming, unknown, soon to be players, soon to be contenders, but not what they were back in 09, 2010, 11. The biggest star in the UFC are the 3 letters. Would you not agree that when the UFC says they come to town, they could sell tickets off those 3 letters alone?
As the clash between boxing and MMA intensifies, figures are shaping a broader conversation about branding, star power, and the future of combat sports. Ultimately, it's the fans who benefit most from the evolving narratives, dynamic personalities, and ever-growing spectacle. If you enjoyed this video and want to see latest updates for all things MMA, hit the like button, share with a fellow MMA fan, subscribe, and press the bell icon so you never miss a beat.